Today I'm going over the 7 bottles that got me into whiskey. Let's do it. Welcome to Average Joe's Whiskey. My name is Joe. If you're new to the channel, or maybe you've been here before, but you might be wondering, who the hell is this guy? How does one end up with a whiskey obsession that some people might describe as unhealthy? The truth is, it's a slow process. You don't just wake up with hundreds of bottles in your house, wondering where all of your spare time and money went. I fell in love with whiskey slowly. It took me years. Today I'm going to tell you the beginning of that story, before I started spending all of my spare resources on this gorgeous amber liquid. There were 7 bottles that got me here. 7 bottles that I absolutely fell in love with and still drink to this day. So relax, pour yourself a drink, and let's go back in time to 2008. So 2008 was the year that I turned 21 years old. I didn't want to drink the same crap that all the college kids and teenagers were drinking. I wanted to be sophisticated. So when I went to a bar, I would order a Maker's Mark on the rocks. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a regular bottle of Maker's Mark, so we're gonna have to use this Maker's 46 and just pretend. Actually, we're gonna have to pretend with quite a few bottles on this list. But anyway, Maker's Mark was the first whiskey that I started drinking regularly. I didn't start drinking Maker's Mark because I loved it. I started drinking it because it was the only whiskey that I could recognize at a bar and I knew wasn't crap. So whenever I went to the bar, I would order a Maker's Mark on the rocks. And if you've ever had Maker's Mark on the rocks, it's super easy to drink. I generally don't drink anything on the rocks anymore because the ice kind of kills the sweetness. Any whiskey on ice tends to really mute the sweetness, so it's not something I do now. But if you're just getting into whiskey, putting a little ice in it is a great way to go. These days I tell people to add water instead of ice because it gives you better control over the flavor profile. Ice will just kind of melt and dilute the whiskey to a point where it becomes basically water. But when you're young, early in the game, you don't really care about that stuff. And I didn't know any better, so Maker's Mark became my drink of choice for the next year or so, I would say. I would drink it at bars. I didn't love it enough to buy a bottle and drink it at home. But the next bottle I did like enough to buy and drink at home. So at this point in 2008, I'm drinking Maker's Mark at bars, but I want a whiskey that I can drink at home. So next up is the first whiskey that I started buying regularly and keeping at my house. And this whiskey was recommended to me by my father. Thanks, Dad. And it was Elijah Craig's Small Batch. Now we're gonna have to pretend again, because all I had is a toasted. But back in 2008, the Elijah Craig Small Batch was like $20 for like a 1.75 liter. And it carried a 12-year age statement. So you could get a giant bottle of 12-year-old whiskey for like 20 bucks back in 2008. It was insane. It was awesome. Unfortunately, I didn't know enough to appreciate it back then, but I still really liked the Elijah Craig Small Batch. I was drinking it mostly on ice, sometimes neat, but I wasn't really appreciating the subtleties or the individual flavors. I just wanted to be sophisticated, and in my head, whiskey drinkers were sophisticated. So for the next year or two, I would keep Elijah Craig Small Batch in the house, and that was my go-to whiskey of choice for that time. Absolutely loved it. I still love it. I generally don't keep the Elijah Craig Small Batch on hand anymore because I have so many of their barrel proofs and single barrels and toasted. But Elijah Craig still makes delicious whiskey, and I absolutely love Heaven Hill. Absolutely love Elijah Craig. Now these first 2 bottles were great, like introduction bourbons. But this is the point in the story where we start getting a little more serious about our whiskey. I have a cousin who was really into bourbon at the time, still is. What's up, Chong? Shout out to Chong if he's watching. Chong would give me a bottle of whiskey for my birthday or for Christmas. He gave me like a bottle of Buffalo Trace, and honestly, I didn't really love it at the time. But one year he gave me a bottle of whiskey that I did absolutely fall in love with. Now this was the first bottle that really kind of blew my mind. Four Roses Single Barrel. Now these first 2 bottles have proof point in the low 90s. Four Roses Single Barrel comes in at 100 proof. And this is the first bottle that I had that was high rye. So this has a lot more spice than anything I had drank before. And I absolutely loved that cinnamon spice that I would get from this bottle. At this point, I stopped adding ice to my whiskey. I would drink this neat 100% of the time, and I absolutely loved it. Now, I still knew very little about bourbon other than what it said on the bottle. And what it said on the bottle is single barrel. So I thought to myself, wow, I guess single barrels mean that the whiskey's better. So because I found a single barrel that I loved, I completely thought single barrel was the way to go. And at that point, I bought nothing but single barrels for the next 5 years. So after the Four Roses, the first single barrel that I bought was a Jack Daniel's single barrel. Now we're gonna have to pretend again. This is a Jack Daniel's single barrel rye. I'm talking about the original Jack Daniel's single barrel Tennessee whiskey, 94 proof. I feel like it was new at the time, or at least I hadn't really seen it. This was probably 2009, 2010. But I knew the Four Roses single barrel was absolutely delicious. And I had heard of Jack Daniel's. I knew Jack Daniel's made quality whiskey. So I thought, wow, a Jack Daniel's single barrel, that must be amazing. And it turns out, it is amazing. Jack Daniel's makes really good single barrel whiskey. Now these days, everybody loves the single barrel proof because those are such a good value. But these regular Jack Daniel's single barrels at 94 proof, these are great. This rye is absolutely delicious. The regular Tennessee whiskey, absolutely delicious. So this is the smaller bottle, the 375 milliliter. I would get the regular size 750 milliliter Jack Daniel's single barrel Tennessee whiskeys. I would pour myself a giant glass of the Jack Daniel's single barrel. I would sip on it all night long. It almost got me in trouble a few times, but Jack Daniel's single barrel was absolutely the next bottle that I fell in love with. Now I was perfectly happy drinking the Jack Daniel's single barrel for many years. I would still keep the Elijah Craig in the house as my cheap go-to pour, but I would usually keep either a Four Roses single barrel or a Jack Daniel's single barrel as when I wanted something a step up. And I was totally happy drinking those until everything changed one day. Now I forget what year this was. I want to say this is 2015 or so. 2015, Christmas Day, I was at my cousin's house. And my cousin broke out a bottle called William LaRue Weller. And this absolutely blew my mind. The first thing I noticed was the proof. It was 125 proof. And at the time, I didn't even know proof could go that high. I had never had anything over 100 proof. 125, I was like, what? That's insane, dude. It's insane. So I tried the William LaRue Weller. It absolutely blew my mind. The next day, or I don't know, the next week, a short time afterwards, I went to my local ABC store. I walked in and I said, I would like a bottle of William LaRue Weller, please. And they didn't look at me like I was crazy, but they're like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have that. You have to special order it. And I was like, okay. So I put my name on this list, completely forgot about it. And 2 years later, randomly, ABC calls me and says, hey, your bottle's in stock. I was like, what bottle are you talking about? Oh yeah, and then it occurred to me, yeah, I ordered a bottle of William LaRue Weller 2 years ago. So I went into the ABC, and for $90, I got my bottle of William LaRue Weller. Unfortunately, I don't have one now, so we're going to have to use this Weller Full Proof as a placeholder. But man, I drank that William LaRue Weller. I really wish that I appreciated it more. I mean, I was treating that WLW like it was my everyday pour for a month. I was just pounding it out of a rocks glass. Unbelievable whiskey. I've never gotten my hands on another William LaRue or any other Buffalo Trace Antique Collection bottle for that matter since then. Hopefully I will again someday, but that was one hell of a bottle. So William LaRue Weller was the 5th bottle that I absolutely fell in love with. So when I went into the ABC store to look for that William LaRue Weller, and they didn't have it, they told me I had to special order it, I started looking at other bottles, and I noticed this Knob Creek single barrel. Now what caught my eye about the Knob Creek single barrel is that it's 120 proof. I had just learned a week prior that the proof can go up to like 125 or higher. I knew it was good because it was a single barrel, and I know Knob Creek. I would have a Knob Creek at a bar like once in a while. I knew they made good whiskey, but that 120 proof really hooked me. This became my new go-to special occasion, high proof, delicious bottle. And in fact, this is actually what I'm drinking right now. Still delicious. 9 years later, it's still delicious. In fact, this current bottle of Knob Creek single barrel was probably being distilled right around the time I bought my first bottle of Knob Creek single barrel. Funny to think about. But anyway, the Knob Creek single barrel, totally fell in love with. I would give these as Christmas gifts to anybody when I wanted to give a bottle of whiskey. One of the most delicious bottles that I had tasted up to that point. It wasn't quite the William LaRue Weller, but it was as good as I could find on the shelf regularly for a reasonable price. I think those were like $40 at the time, maybe even less. But anyway, now my eyes were wide open to the cask strength bourbons, and that brought me to Wild Turkey Rare Breed. Wild Turkey Rare Breed was the next cask strength bourbon that I absolutely fell in love with. I still consider it probably my favorite whiskey. If I have to choose a favorite whiskey, it's kind of an arbitrary question. I don't like when people ask me. But if I had to say a favorite whiskey, this is usually what I tell people. Just because it's excellent and you can go to the store and find it. When somebody asks you what your favorite whiskey is, they don't want to hear that it's, like a Pappy 15 or a WLW. They don't want to hear a bottle that they can't find themselves. They're asking you what your favorite whiskey is because they want to be able to go to the store and buy it so that they can try it at home. So when somebody asks me what my favorite whiskey is, this is what I tell them. That way, if they want to try it, they can. And they won't be disappointed. Because Rare Breed is delicious. But Rare Breed became my new go-to cask strength bourbon. I would still mix it up with some of the other bottles on this list every once in a while. But this one really became my front runner for the next several years. And these are the 7 bottles that got me into whiskey. Sort of. Obviously, there are a few placeholders here. But these are roughly the 7 bottles that got me into whiskey. Rare Breed was the last bottle that I added to my list, probably somewhere around 2018 or so. I still enjoy all of these bottles. These are the 7 bottles that I drank regularly up through about 2020 or so. That's when my whiskey appreciation kind of turned into an obsession, and things started going off the rails from there. And I ended up with a whole lot more than 7 bottles. But these are the 7 bottles that got me into the game. If you're new to whiskey, everybody has different tastes. But I think if you follow a similar path, I don't think you'll be disappointed. These are still excellent bottles. I would still recommend all of these to anybody who's interested in whiskey. And if you're just starting out, give them a try. What do you have to lose besides $30 to $60? Except for the Weller. You're probably not gonna find one of those. But the other 6, $30 to $60, give them a shot. But anyway, I hope you learned something from my story. I hope it wasn't boring. I thought it was a very interesting story in my head, but as I've been recording this video, I feel like it was kind of boring. I hope it didn't come off that way. If you would do me a huge favor and hit the like button, I would greatly appreciate it. And if you subscribe to the channel, I will be your best friend for the rest of your life. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.